They probably like my Socorro presentation.
Yeah. Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my new show, Out of Nowhere, on this Friday, the 29th of March at 3 o'clock Eastern, 12 o'clock Pacific, and 7 o'clock in the UK. Well, my guest today is Ben Moss. He's a UFO researcher, investigator, and author of quite a new book out, Not of This World. Ben has appeared on guest research on Netflix, the History Channel, the Travel Channel, National Geographical, the History Channel, the Discovery Channel. Can we please welcome Ben to the show? Hello there.
Howdy. Good to see you.
Nice to see you too. Give us a little bit of background about yourself and how you got into being a researcher for UFOs.
Yeah, I as a child, I saw a Walter Cronkite special on TV about UFOs, and that got me started. And as a big comic book collector, when I'd go to buy comic books, if I saw a UFO magazine, I'd grab that too. And so as I got older, kind of went in and out of looking into it. And then I eventually joined MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, became a field investigator, then became the chief field investigator for the state of Virginia, and was there for several years. And now I have my own company, the UFO Guys LLC, that you can find on Facebook just by putting the UFO Guys in the search bar. So I've been doing this for a long time. Not going to say how old I am, but it's been decades I've been looking into UFOs, and firmly convinced that some type of civilization other than our own has been checking up on our planet, probably keep tabs on us, since we're still a very violent race of humans that still kill each other and have nonstop wars. So they probably want to keep tabs on us to make sure we don't take our wars out into space, is one of my theories about why they're monitoring us.
Yeah, I mean, it's you just never know. I'd like to the state of ufology at the moment.
Yeah, there's the usual stuff going on. I mean, the releases, I appreciate the fact that people are digging into some of these videos and getting some of these videos out, and there's a group looking into it, supposedly with the government. But I've always said there's better camera footage from Vietnam War, from World War II with the Foo Fighters. There's much better video than what they ever show us. I firmly believe that the real UFO working group that has been investigating UFOs since Roswell and maybe before Roswell is a group that you'll never hear of. You'll never know who's in it. They'll never be public. Those are the ones that are threatening the current witnesses like David Grush and the pilots, threatening them to keep them silent. But there's a secret. It's a secret above all other secrets, because they know that there's another civilization or multiple civilizations visiting us. So the real UFO working group, you'll never hear about. You'll never see it. You'll never know who's in that group. They're the ones that make the threats. They're the ones that have billions of dollars in black funds that can do whatever they want. And they don't want disclosure. That's why I don't think we'll ever have a real disclosure, because they just don't want it. And the reason for that is because if you believe Roswell is a crash of a real ET vehicle, and that perhaps there was a crash in Russia or maybe China or both, then the whole reason for keeping it a secret is the technology for warfare. So, if Russia or China has a piece of some of these craft and we have a piece of some of these craft, they're not going to share it with anybody. They're not going to tell the world they have it, because they want to use it for warfare to stay on top, of everything. So I just don't believe disclosure will ever happen, because this group will never come out into the public.
Yeah, I can imagine that as well. It's true. They, about the alien races and things like that, they must look at us sometimes and think, well, they're always fighting each other. They're wanting to blow each other up all the time. They must look at it that way and think, my golly, what is the world coming to?
Yeah, it's probably a history lesson for them, for any race to have mastered traveling space, they had to overcome their own wars, their own atomic age, their own nuclear age. They had to kind of get together to be able to travel space in like a more peaceful way, more like kind of like Star Trek in a way. But I believe that they see us as, I mean, it's a mess on this planet. The stuff we do to each other is horrible. The wars, we still killing each other. So that's a good reason to keep tabs on us. I can't think of any time on Earth that we haven't had war somewhere. And it's just a shame, it's like they probably load up with children to say, here's how not to have a planet, evolve into a conscious state, and they're just mantras. I don't think they'd really interfere if we ended up blowing ourselves up, but it's just a history lesson for them. They might have seen hundreds of thousands of civilizations come and go, and there's probably been civilizations that never made it out into space because they destroyed themselves, and we're kind of heading in that direction. Before we can travel the stars, we got to solve this problem and stop fighting all these wars.
That's true, yeah. I'd like to pick up on about the Socorro event, the 1964 UFO landing in New Mexico of evening of April 2064.
Yeah, that's the book I wrote. It's on Amazon. You can go to Amazon. Not of This World, the 1964 Socorro UFO Landing with Human World. So yeah, that was the case that Dr. Hynek kind of pushed him over the edge, where he started to believe that there was actually visitations happening. And after this case, he started CUFOS, which was his own investigative organization outside of Project Blue Book that he was involved in. And that's when he stopped, towing the line and talking about swamp gas and things like that, when he finally was fed up with because Project Blue Book was just a covering story for the public. They didn't want the public to really know what was going on behind the scenes. So, the same old story that in 1964, a UFO landed with 2 4-foot tall creatures. A police officer saw it, got up pretty close to it, changed his life tremendously. And as I looked into it and wrote this book with Tony Angiola, I just couldn't find any other explanation. And when we did some homework and went to the site several times, there were egg-shaped UFOs seen throughout this whole area, seen at Holloman Air Force Base, seen by police officers, military personnel. Lonnie got real close to the craft. The creatures were as tall as a creosote bush out in the Socorro Desert, which was 4 feet tall. That bush is still there. And, that changed his life. And even Lonnie, before he passed away, he said if he had it to do all over again, he would have never told anybody anything because it didn't make his life any better. He never sought fame or fortune from it. He was pestered about it for a long time, but he was a real honest person. I just talked about what he saw. And he saw a round egg-shaped craft land on 4 gear. 2 occupants got out, got back in. It rose up with a blue flame that wasn't a propellant because he was only 30 feet from it. If it had been a rocket, it would have cooked him. But that thing cut off and it went silent. And then the craft shot off into the distance and eventually it reached supersonic speed, completely silent. So 2 different types of engines, one to get it off the ground, kind of like when we go to the moon, we have 1 engine to get us there and 1 engine to land. So, that was the beginning of a big flap in 1964. And there was just no other explanation. It wasn't the lunar lander. The lunar lander in April of 64 was not flying, didn't have an internal engine. The engine that was used in the lunar lander used what's called hydroxine, which is very caustic, and it caused the engine to seize up. So they could only fly for like 90 seconds, and then they had to rebuild the engine. The first 2 flights of the lunar lander were months later, and both of them caused the pilots to eject to save their lives because both of them crashed. So it wasn't the lunar lander, which had round landing gears, and the landing gear at Socorro was a wedge shape. It's kind of like this into the ground, left wedge shaped marks. And it wasn't a student hoax. So we pretty much disproved that. So the only explanation left was what Lonnie Zamora described, that it was an egg-shaped craft with two small humanoids. And it seemed like they were having trouble because they almost hit a car. 4 other witnesses in a car stopped at a gas station and said this craft almost hit the top of their car. So it was having trouble. And where it landed in the Socorro Desert is a depression. It's a kind of a bowl. And when you're in the bottom of that, you can't see around the edges. And so it was a good place to land. And when Lonnie saw them, it looked like they were looking up under the craft. And one of them turned and was actually startled to see that somebody was observing them. And they got back in really fast and took off. He heard 2 doors slam, an inner and outer hull, and then the craft lifted up, hovered for a moment, and then slowly started gliding away and then picked up speed. So in that area, you had multiple sightings. You had La Madera, another landing in La Madera, which is west of there, and you had Holloman Air Force Base, and then an Air Force pilot saw the craft in the air, egg-shaped craft with the same symbol on it. So there were multiple reports of this, which is very unusual to see egg-shaped craft. And we still, I don't know of any nation on Earth that flies an egg-shaped craft that has no means of propulsion that's observable.
It must have been hard for Lonnie then when he saw things like that, and then trying to report it because he were a police officer. They probably kept saying to him, "Don't be silly, you've never seen anything like that." His life must have been hell for quite a while.
Yeah, Sergeant Chavez was the first person to show up, his superior. And even though, Lonnie was a little bit dark skinned, he said he was white as a ghost. He said he was really terrified. And he was so shaken up that he was a Catholic. He spent 2 or 3 hours that night of the landing talking to his priest about what he had seen. And I believe he got a really good look at the creatures because he called them creatures later in life. I think he was close enough to tell that they weren't human. And when he talked to his priest told him, you can do one of 2 things. You can stop talking about it, or you can tell the truth. And so Lonnie always told the truth. The story never changed. He never embellished the story. He never added anything to it. He told it straightforward. And that's what, I've talked to his his daughter and friends of his. They all said the same thing, that Lonnie wouldn't make this up. He was sorry he ever brought it up. And he had people wanting him to be on TV shows, and, Japan called him and all these other countries. And he just got fed up with it. He just didn't want to have anything to do with it. And he eventually left the police force, worked at a gas station, and then eventually retired. But his friends even said that they wouldn't bring it up. If Lonnie brought it up, fine, but you just didn't ask him about it because he didn't want to talk about it. If he wanted to talk about it, he would talk about it. And he was a very respected person, a very honest, very salt of the earth type of gentleman. And there was absolutely zero reason for him to make this story up. It just caused him a lot of grief. And he became very quiet. His daughter told me that afterwards he became a much more quiet man. And I think because of his Catholic upbringing, when he got close enough to see the faces of the creatures, it freaked him out. He thought he saw demons.
It did. It must be so strange to see something like that and then trying to figure out later, what was it I saw? Because, you can remember so much, and then probably later on, maybe weeks later, you think, oh, God. So it's difficult sometimes to get a full picture.
Yeah, especially since he had no interest in UFOs at all. And being very religious, when you see something that's not human, your first thought is this something that's, like a demon or a monster or something like that? So even a normal person encountering something that's not human, it would freak anybody out. And he handled it well. I mean, he was he told the story the same way over the years, but it changed his life, and not for the better.
Yeah, told the story numerous times and never changed it, did he?
No.
Let's have a look at something else. Give us some evidence of the advanced propulsions.
We did
Advanced propulsions.
yeah, we did a conference recently where we showed what we called evidence of advanced propulsion. Ray Stanford had been doing this for a long time, but when I see what I think are true UFOs photographed or in film, they usually have an aura around them or a glow around them, which is a function of their propulsion. Because I think these things surround themselves with like a static shell.
Right.
There's no gravity inside of that static shell. That's why they can, like the Tic Tac, can do this kind of stuff, and they're not getting slammed against the wall. Who knows if they're autonomous vehicles or if there's actually a creature in there? A lot of them might be probes like we send to other planets. But usually I look for changes around the vehicle. Sometimes you only know the true shape of what you're filming or photographing because the plasma surrounding it or the propulsion it's using is kind of blowing up this picture, so you kind of get a glow and you're not sure what the actual shape of the craft is. But typically they'll enact with the environment. If you have a magnetometer, it'll spike up because it's sending off electromagnetic waves, and you'll see a glow around. There'll be an aura around the vehicle, which is some type of function of its propulsion. So, and then the movement, of course, if it's doing things like this, right angle turns at a high speed, it's not one of ours. When the government came out and said that the things that David Faber saw, the Tic Tac, that might be an adversary's craft, that's the worst possible explanation, because if China or Russia had something like that, we're in a lot of trouble. We're going to be speaking Chinese soon. But I believe that that type of propulsion, evidence of that type of propulsion, is not something made on this planet.
Right. If anybody's got a question, just put it in capitals in the chat room. What do you think the end game is for them about UFOs? What's the end game then?
For them or for us?
For them. What they want
Observation. Maybe observation, just seeing how civilizations develop. We're in some ways, if they're like 1,000 years ahead of us, they might have one view. But if they're 500,000 years more advanced than we are, they could be like looking at an anthill. You just don't know what their reasons are. But observation, recording of history, tracking how civilizations come to be, how some survive, how some don't, because we have no idea if we're going to survive long enough to travel space. But I just think it's curiosity. I don't think any civilization would come here for our resources, because if you can travel the stars, you can find all the resources that are here on Earth all over the galaxy. You don't need to take gold out of this planet or mine it for precious metals, because there's precious metals in anywhere you've had a star. So I think it's just history, a lesson in how civilizations evolve. It'd be just like we look at nature in the wild. I think that if they're very highly conscious and are not, the type of species that's warlike, then they're probably observing us to see how not to be a civilization, how not to evolve, and this planet's kind of going in the wrong direction because of the fighting, and almost every war is fought over religion and land and just stupid things. And it's probably almost like a sad play they're watching, and they're just recording it for observation and for, to know how not to evolve.
Hey, Ben, do you think the they have lived on Earth before, and then they wanted to come back and take the planet over again.
I don't think they want to take the planet over. There's no point in that. I think that there may be evidence that they've interacted with us in the past. There's certainly a lot of strange things in history that would allude to that. That if you take the Bible literally, it seems like more of a recording of meetings with extraterrestrials than with angels. But of course, the Bible is written by man, and there's chapters left in, chapters taken out, and but Ezekiel's wheel is a good example of a possible a not very advanced civilization trying to describe an advanced civilization, and instead of recognizing it as some type of ET, they call it God or angels or something like that. But if they've been here before, if they had something to do with our genetics, our genetic traits, the human brain had a big leap from I think it was 700 cc's to 1800 cc's. The human brain grew very fast in the past, and there's no real explanation for that jump in intelligence, unless, of course, there was some type of interference. If we did evolve from apes, there was a big leap that we're missing all the data from. But that's hard to prove, and so I just don't know. I would imagine they've been here before because of a lot of the stories. Even Caesar and some of the generals in the past would describe burning shields crossing the sky. Well, a burning shield is a disc crossing the sky, and the walls of Jericho coming down with a sound, and there's all kinds of things. Sodom and Gomorrah blowing up in what seems to be a nuclear explosion. I don't attribute these things to a god, so to speak, but maybe some type of advanced race, and that doesn't mean to say that there might be races that are not in our best interest that have come here. That may be warlike, like the Klingons in Star Trek. You may have good races that are trying to protect us, and bad races that come and want to, abduct people and torture them, or take over the planet for whatever reason. But I believe there's more than one civilization that has come here. I find it hard to believe that some races could conquer space and not have overcome, the evil that men do. They become more conscious. But that's not to say that's not happening. If we make it into space the way we are now, we're going to have warships, and not peaceful planetary visits like on Star Trek. There's going to be warships. There's going to be conflict. There's conflict already trying to get to the moon, trying to get to Mars. We're going to fight with China and everybody else to colonize the moon. And once we start going to space, we're going to probably take war out into space.
Hey, Ben, do you think some of the craft what are seen in the sky are our own?
Yeah. There's a lot of mistaken identity. When some of the flying, some of the wedge-shaped craft that we put up, the stealth bombers and things like that, were mistaken for UFOs. There's typically, if it's one of ours, you're going to see some type of propulsion trail behind it. It's going to be burning some type of fuel. UFOs don't burn fuel. They usually don't leave a trail. So anything that looks exotic or strange but has a trail behind it, a condensation or whatever, it's probably one of ours. And with so many drones up there, drones, of course, don't leave any trail, but they can only go so fast. You have like a hypersonic missile can go very fast, but it's going to go in a straight line. If you have things that are making right angle turns at 3,000 miles an hour, I don't think that's ours. But because there's so many drones out there, there's drones that are made to look like UFOs, made to look like cubes. There's balloons that are mistaken for UFOs. I've seen some video from airplanes of things that look like balloons, but they're strange looking. And, it's just, you got to look for the evidence of advanced propulsion. So if there's an R around it, that halo, if there's plasma being displayed, if there's anomalous movement, probably not ours. But everything else probably is, especially if you see a trail, if you see a rocket, if you see a plume, that's probably one of ours. Meant to travel in atmosphere, not meant to travel in space.
We've got a question from Steph. I'll put it up there. Question for Ben. Do you believe that aliens are harvesting genetic material and even doing genetic experiments? Good
It's a
question.
possibility. I don't. There's really, things like abductions are very hard to prove, but they're also very hard to disprove. Um, I there's the possibility that they may, maybe a race has come here that's having their own genetic problems and are trying to find a way to continue their race. But that's a possibility. It's just very hard to prove. You can't say it is, you can't say it isn't. It's just, you have to have some type of proof of that. And it's just kind of a guess. Anybody that says they know what's going on, it's a guess. You can't say for sure that they're doing that, but you can't say for sure that they're not doing it. There's a lot about UFOs and aliens that you just can't answer the questions because you don't have the data. If you try to approach it from a scientific viewpoint, you need to have data that's repeatable and provable, and we don't have a lot of that. So it's all guesswork at this point, but it could be happening.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Put that out.
Good question.
Why do you think the government keep lying to us about UFOs and aliens?
Well,
Are they frightened? But it
yeah.
might upset us all.
Well, they don't want to admit they've been lying to the public for 80 plus years. They can't come out and say, look, there's some type of unknown civilization that's penetrating our military airspace and maybe even abducting humans, but it's okay, don't worry about it. They can't say that. They, as I said before, it's really for military gain. You want to gain, the upper hand over our adversaries with the technology that they display. You want to get your hands on that technology. So they can't say, they just can't come out and say, look, we've been lying to you all this time, because then nobody's going to believe anything. Mostly, I don't believe anything they say about UFOs anyway. The new group they formed is whitewashing everything. The guy that retired, he was pretty bad at it. He didn't believe anything to begin with, but I just don't think that they have a foot to stand on. They can't tell the truth because Roswell probably was a real crash of an ET vehicle with bodies. They can't backtrack and say, well, we lied to you for this reason or that reason, because they threaten people's lives. They want the material for military purposes. And, I've talked to some military people that I could never give their name, but one person told me that at the very top of the food chain is another civilization. If that's true, then we're not in charge of this ship called Earth. And if we're not in charge and somebody else is in charge, that's another reason to not come forward and say anything.
Yeah. How do we determine what are real UAPs and what are hoaxes?
Well, you got to have the data. If you have the equipment, a magnetometer, a gravimeter, if you have dual cameras for parallax, if you photograph or film something with two different devices, you can kind of get your azimuth and zenith and all your measurements. But really, it's just like I said before, if it's violating the known laws of physics, if it's making right angle turns surrounded by a plasma field or some type of static shell, if it has a shape that's not aerodynamic at all, but there's no evidence of any type of propulsion, no wings, no fins, no motor, no plume, and it's traveling at supersonic or hypersonic speeds, then you have to imagine that it's not one of ours, because no government has come out with anything that's, when China came out with a hypersonic missile, that kind of surprised everybody, but it's still a straight line device, and it's not an aircraft, it's a warcraft. So until we're flying spaceships to Mars and the moon, I would say that things that are defying the laws of physics and show strange, fields around them are probably true UFOs. The hoaxes, you have to look at your photographs, you look at the metadata, which can tell you. You have to analyze videos. You get pros to do that, but usually most video analysts can tell if there's been alterations to a video or a photograph. I'm pretty good with photographs, but when it comes to video, I'd rather have somebody that knows what they're doing look at that. But applying some of the science that we have now to older video and older photographs has brought out some interesting things. The old McMinnville photograph of 1957 shows a plume below that craft, which in 1957 nobody would have thought to put that in a picture. Plus, it was a Instamatic camera. But sometimes when you look at old photo and old footage, you can pull out data that wasn't known at the time by using new computers. So it's really a matter of if it flies in a straight line. It's like that video that you'll see on a lot of TV shows from the Chilean Air Force, where you see that object going and there's a plume behind it. It's in infrared, which is the worst way to film something. But that's an airplane, and we did analysis on that, and we know the flight number. It was flying away from the camera, but they keep calling it a UFO, but it's flying in a straight line. It's not going that fast. You can see the two black circles of the heat from the engines. And so, if it looks like an airplane, if it walks like, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's a duck.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, that's true. Let's talk about that new book you got out, Not of This World. I know you've got a few things in it. Tell us a little bit about how you got to write it.
Well, it's on Amazon, so you can. I had some people in the UK. I sent some books over there. It's pretty expensive to do, but I was at the 2014 MUFON Symposium in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, with Tony Angiola, and we saw James Fox. James Fox has done some really well done UFO movies, Phenomena, I Know What I Saw, and he's a filmmaker, and he did a speech where he brought up Socorro. I remember seeing something about Socorro on TV where this tourist had driven by not long after it happened and took footage. And so I got with James after his presentation and said I'd go find that footage foolishly, which was a whole long journey, which I did find the footage eventually, but it took me. I called all kinds of production companies, all kinds of TV stations, networks. It was in the MUFON Journal. 2 different journals had the cover story was our search for the lost Socorro footage. So once we found the footage and started digging into it, we ran into Ray Stanford, who had written the original book, Socorro Saucer in the Pentagon Pantry. And Ray Stanford doesn't live far from me. So we eventually got hooked up with Ray and started talking to him about it. He had been on site in 64. He knew Dr. Hynek. Dr. Hynek invited him onto the site about 8 days after the event or 6 days after the event. And Ray had done a lot of work there, had interviewed Lonnie, and was there with the Blue Book team, and wrote a book about it that was very detailed, got a lot of really good information. So our book was kind of an update of what Ray had discovered with new information and new data about the symbol, other witnesses that we found when we were in Socorro. A lot more people had seen the craft but didn't come forward. Several police officers that worked with Lonnie had seen the craft, but they weren't going to say that because they saw how Lonnie was treated. So after we got with James Fox, we started digging into it. We went to Socorro several times. And the more we dug, the more information we got. And it got to the point where we actually were on Kevin Randall's show. Kevin Randall's another UFO researcher. And he was so interested after we were on the show that he wrote a book called Encounter in the Desert. And so after he wrote his book, I was like, well, shoot, I should have written one long ago. And it was really hard to get started. because COVID had hit, and I was at working, and finally I just started writing. And once I got going, it was just a matter of how much data could I put into it. And a gentleman named Rob Mercer had gotten a hold of these Blue Book files that were found at a house. Turns out one of the Blue Book officers had left this box of information from Project Blue Book in this garage, and it went up on Craigslist, and Rob Mercer bought the information and verified it came from a Blue Book officer. And it had a lot of stuff about Socorro. It had a lot of files about Socorro, a lot of private notes, a lot of confusion. And so when we got that, he gave me a lot of the original copies of that. It showed how the Air Force, the Pentagon, the Joint Chief of Staff were all interested in the case. Were all baffled because they couldn't find an explanation for it. Hector Quintanilla, the Blue Book head of Blue Book, swore that he was going to go find this craft in a Air Force unit or hangar somewhere. He never found it, and he was baffled to the day about it. And and Hynek, of course, it pushed him over the edge to form CUFOS. But once we got all this data, we decided to amalgamate that. And working with Ray wrote a chapter in the book concerning the symbol. And we just added all this new data into it, and all these newspaper clippings that we uncovered that showed that egg-shaped craft were seen up and down that area in the 60s by very credible people, military pilots and police officers. And then we just put the book together. It took 5 years of investigations and visits to finally get it together. And writing's hard, I've never written a book before, and so it's about, I think it's over 200 pages, but that's the graphics. That's kind of what Lonnie saw, the two creatures there. A friend of ours, Norm Gagnon, graphics. And we have a lot of the information about the, all the Blue Book files in there, and even the one that says that the final determination was unknown. To this day, that case is still an unknown. And Project Blue Book was very baffled. They couldn't figure it out. They thought they would find it was a black project. Captain Holder, who was there at the site, he was in charge of White Sands, and he knew all the black projects, everything that was flying. On that day, their radar wasn't even turned on. It was a late night, but there was nothing, no egg-shaped craft, nothing like that flying before or since that would fit that description. Hector Quintanilla went to all the bases. Everybody in the Joint Chief of Staff, meaning the president, also got involved, saying, "What's going on? Can't you explain this?" And Captain Holder said, "Look, I can't explain it. There were 4 indentations in the desert. The indentations were estimated to be from a craft that weighed 9 tons. For a 9-ton craft to land and take off and be silent and move off in the distance, we don't have anything like that now." And this was in 1964. So
exactly.
It was so interesting that we just put it all together in a book, because I wanted to set the record straight. There's so many bad armchair, researchers that don't go out in the field and do any work. They were saying it was a hoax or it's the lunar lander. So I went to see if it was a lunar lander or if it was a hoax. And lo and behold, all the evidence pointed to what Lonnie saw and described is exactly what happened.
Yeah, I think Steph's got another question. Question for Ben. Do you think that aliens are from another dimension or from outer space?
Could be both. We're if you know a little bit about string theory, there's probably at least 10, maybe 20 different dimensions. It's really hard to say, because string theory is basically things come down to a tiny vibrating string, and when you're vibrating at different frequencies, you can exist in different planes of existence. And it's kind of like our vision is such a limited range. The things we can see are so limited, but there's so much bigger spectrum out there that if we could see everything else that's going on, the world would be completely different. So could be dimensions overlaid on top of ours that sometimes bleed through. That's when you have poltergeist activity, or maybe UFOs bleed through from another dimension. But I also believe that there's other civilizations. When the Drake equation pretty much postulates that in our Milky Way galaxy alone, there's probably 100,000 civilizations. And then when you realize there's trillions of stars, probably billions of galaxies out there, the number of stars that we found that have planets in the Goldilocks zone, that not too far, not too close to the sun, there's life everywhere. And so our solar system is fairly young in comparison. And the Milky Way galaxy is not an older galaxy. So there's probably many, many civilizations out there. But traveling in between dimensions, it's something that is a possibility. And so, it's really hard to pin down what is actually happening. I think nuts and bolts of it is there are certain craft from other worlds that, like the crash at Roswell, was a nuts and bolts craft that had small beings. But there could be interdimensional beings. There could be things that were just so far beyond our understanding we would never kind of put a handle on it.
Thank you, Steph, for that. Next question is from Becca. How much do you think people like Spielberg and Roddenberry are in for what they know?
Well, Spielberg has always been interested in UFOs, and he had a few contacts that told him things. I think that I don't think they know a whole lot. I think that I know Ronald Reagan saw a UFO, and I know that President Nixon might have was good friends with Jackie Gleason and might have taken him to the Air Force Base to see the bodies from Roswell. That's a pretty well-known story that Jackie Gleason's wife kind of corroborated. But Spielberg always had an interest in it. Roddenberry, of course, did Star Trek and was a visionary and used a lot of the great science fiction writers, Isaac Asimov and people like that, for a lot of the stories in Star Trek. But even when we did the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still and Earth versus Flying Saucers, the Air Force was part of the movie making process to say this you got this wrong, you got this right. So they were giving input about UFOs when, back in the day, I think it was Truman. There's an old video of President Truman where when UFOs were being spotted, they said, well, when you have your joint chief of staff meetings, do you talk about UFOs? And President Truman says, that's the first thing we ever talk about. And then he kind of clammed up after that and didn't say that anymore. But it's been talked about a long time. That's where the secrecy comes in. Every president sworn in, if you look at interviews with Clinton and Obama and what they've done on Jimmy Kimmel and all these shows, when they bring up UFOs, they get real nervous and they can't say anything because they've been sworn to secrecy. And so there's a deep, dark secret there that nobody's talking about, and I don't think they'll ever be able to talk about it. It's just for the reasons I've already mentioned. This is above everything. The most top secret knowledge in the world is about aliens, and they're not going to let it out. If it gets out, it's not going to get out because they let it out. It's going to get out because somebody finally brought some evidence that's irrefutable.
It just makes you wonder, Ben, who rules the world? Who makes decisions?
Yeah, if people think we're living in a matrix or an alien's computer game or something, it's just life is life. You have to not go too deep down the rabbit hole. You just have to. For most people, it doesn't really matter who's making the decisions. You live your life, and you don't want to live in a conspiracy-fueled world and be worrying about, things that you just can't understand and can't prove or disprove. Or, I really, when you talk about what is life and what's the meaning of life and things like that, you just got to live your life and be comfortable and be a good person. Live by the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And not be so angry. Everybody's so angry all the time, and they're either aliens or there aren't. It only takes one of these stories or one of these craft to be real and true for the whole thing to be true. Just one. And look at all the examples we have out there. If Roswell was a crash or a real ET, then there's ETs. And it seems to me, in my own opinion, that Roswell was a crash of several craft that probably flew through our new radar, which we knew was interfering with our craft, and was struck by lightning at the same time. These two craft ran into each other. One came down, skipped, hit Roswell, and then went into Corona. And then you probably had another crash site where there were the bodies. But only one has to be true for the whole thing to be true. And, a guy like Spielberg, he's done some really good movies on it. He's always been fascinated by it. And sometimes, I believe one of the stories with Spielberg was that when he screened Close Encounters, when Ronald Reagan had seen it at the White House, Ronald turned to him and said, you don't know how much of this is actually true, and kind of freaked him out.
Yeah. Have you seen a UFO, Ben?
Yeah. I've seen, I saw, when I was in college, I saw two clouds. I was up in the mountains of Lynchburg, Virginia, and I saw two purple tracks connect two clouds, and then two purple plasma balls whooshing by, going from one cloud to another, which is really one of the strangest things I've ever seen. And then when I was down in Key West, Florida, I saw what looked like a shooting star, but there were two of them, and one of them went at the speed of a shooting star, which is like the blink of an eye, stopped. And another one was coming behind it. That one, the first one made a right angle turn, and the second one came and then didn't stop and made a right angle turn following the first one. And it was like 3 seconds. But the speed must have been incredible. And then in college, I also saw, looked like a missile that was kind of descending. It was making a lot of noise, and it looked like maybe an early prototype of a cruise missile, but this was near a town.
Yeah.
So whatever it was off course. It was coming down, and then a flame came out of it, and it gained altitude. I think that was probably man-made, but yeah, I've seen it. With Tony and I were in Pennsylvania when we saw something in the sky crossing the flight pattern of the airport that was going east to west. There was a bright object coming across, and it looked like a bright white ball. But the sun was so intense when I tried to catch it with my cell phone, it was just too bright. I couldn't see anything through the lens or anything. And we've taken pictures where things show up in the pictures when we were in Socorro that look like cigar shapes with windows or ports on the side of it. But I've had a couple of encounters.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I had an encounter. I think it was 50. I'm just trying. Maybe 64 or 65. I think I was about 18 at the time. One night going home, we'd been out. We weren't drinking or anything. There's three of us. I'm walking towards this golf course, and I saw a cigar-shaped object in the sky. And we pointed at it and said to my dad, well, it looks like a UFO to me. I said, yeah, it does, yeah. And I watched it for about 5 minutes, and then it just floated off and gone in seconds. It just went. And didn't think of it. I went home, went to work, and one of the lads had gone to phone the local paper, said they'd seen a flying object, cigar shaped, over Halifax, and given my name.
Huh.
So when I get the paper on the night time, Curry says, man sees flying object over Halifax. And I thought, oh my God, even put my name there. I went to work there and I got ridiculed, totally ridiculed. You were
Yeah,
drunk to him. I said, I hadn't even had a drink.
yeah. Back in the day, it was
You know,
not.
and then the British government come and see me. I think 2 weeks later, can I come and see you? And I went, oh, yeah, you can do, yeah. They'll come in. And my mum said, there's somebody coming to see you tonight. I went, all right. And I had to write things down. He asked me all these questions. And then I never heard anything after that.
Right.
Very
Yeah,
bizarre and a bit strange, really.
it's
Never forgot
unusual.
about it. It's still in my mind.
Yeah, when you have it, it's one of those things where you
Especially when
gotta be there. You gotta have seen it yourself. Otherwise, explaining it to people that think you're nuts or you're doing drugs or drunk or something like that.
drugs, yeah. Right, I think we've got another question. Becca, are you interested in any other areas of strange phenomena? Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, I've been on a ghost hunt. We went on a ghost hunt to a mansion up in Pennsylvania that had a couple of deaths in it, and we encountered something that mentioned my name twice on the voice recorder. Um, and I've always been interested in paranormal type of things. I've always been interested in Bigfoot, which I think is some unknown species which exists. Um, the one thing that happened on the ghost hunt was one of the women that was with us. It was a 10,000 square foot mansion known to be haunted, and there was a basement door that had no lock or anything on it, you couldn't really shut the door. And one of the women went in there to use the bathroom and then couldn't get out, and so they were saying the door was stuck, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm going to go down there and bang this door open. And I went down there, and when I pushed on the door, and I'm pretty strong, it was like pushing on a wall of cement. I couldn't believe the door wouldn't budge at all. And eventually we had her starting to climb out this tiny window, and then the door swung open by itself. Well, an hour or so later, we were doing an EVP session where you ask a question with a recorder. And one of the guys that was with us said, "What did you do to the girl in the basement?" And this voice said, "I locked her in the cellar." And cellar is a term for a basement that's from the old days, and this was a very old mansion.
Yeah.
And this voice said, I locked her in my cellar. And that was really weird. And we're like, well, that actually happened because we couldn't pull the door open and it had no lock. It didn't even fit in the frame right or anything. So that was unusual. And then the voice had said, had whispered, I'd been up on the third floor, and it said Ben Friend. And I heard something, but it came up on the recorder, said Ben Friend talking to me. And then we were outside after the investigation. My name was mentioned again from 10 feet in the air behind us, and behind us was just a brick wall. So that was kind of weird. And I've always been interested in Bigfoot and Loch Ness and things like that as a kid, that type of stories. We used to have a lot of cool TV shows about that.
Ben, what do you think about Bigfoot then? Is it a real beast, or is it, because they seem to, people who've seen Bigfoot, they say it's there 1 minute, vanishes very quickly, gone.
I don't think it's paranormal. I think that Bigfoot is an unknown species that maybe has survived, maybe relative to the Denisovian or Gigantopithecus. But I remember there was a famous Sir Hilary something, a famous English climber that climbed in the Alps and Mount Everest, and they'd asked him about it. Have you ever come across this creature? And he said, yeah, I have had one walk in front of me. And he said, you know why you can't ever find this creature? They can smell you from miles away. and they're very intelligent. And so, and I've seen a lot of footage. The Patterson-Gimli footage from Cascades, California, I believe, is real footage of a female Bigfoot who in the 1960s had a female Bigfoot costume that had breasts. I mean, that creature had breasts, and there were footprints. The thing weighed about 700 pounds to make the prints that it did. But I think it's a very intelligent species that can tell when we're in the forest, can tell when we're around. There's a couple of pieces of footage that seem to be authentic. And, sadly, eventually somebody's either going to shoot one or capture one. And, I just, we tend to, when we want to find out if something's real or not, we do bad things. But I believe it's a real creature. I don't think it's paranormal or anything like that. I think it's just some leftover from a bygone era. But, it's very intelligent. It can smell us. It knows. There's certain cultures in the Amazon forest that know when something's entered the woods from miles away. The forest tells them that something's in the woods. And I think these creatures are so in touch with nature that they know when you're out there hunting for them. That's why these game cameras, we keep fooling the game cameras, or they get glimpses, but it seems to know, probably watching them setting them up.
Do.
But the Patterson-Gimli footage, I believe, is real. And when all the analysis I've seen of that footage shows that you can see the muscles rippling in the legs, and there's just no way that's a guy in a suit, because just getting to the area where that was filmed had to go on horseback and then had to walk, and it just would be too much work.
Gosh, it would, yeah. I've got another question from Becca again. Do you think there's a connection between them all?
I don't really see a connection. I know that UFOs and
Bigfoot and aliens and
yeah, I've never really seen a connection. I think they're different things, like poltergeists, or I think Bigfoot is separate from UFOs. I don't know. Sometimes some of the encounters with UFOs, maybe they're picking things out of your brain and making you see things that scare you. So maybe they can manifest an image of a Bigfoot to terrify you, but that could just be some kind of hologram or something. I've never really seen a connection between Bigfoot, ghost, and aliens. I think they're three separate things completely. That's just my own opinion, my own experience.
right. We're about come to the end of the show. Where can people buy your book?
It's on Amazon. So if you just Google Not of This World, it should come up. It's the full title, Not of This World, the 1964 Socorro UFO with Humanoids, Witness, Policeman Lonnie Zamora. It's on Amazon. I think it's $5.99. And everything that's in this book, if people want a copy, they can catch me on the UFO Guys on Facebook. I'm the UFO Guys on Facebook, and I'll mail a copy, but it does cost like $40 or something to mail it to the UK. I've sent one to Japan before. That was expensive, but I can send a signed copy if somebody wants an actual signed copy. But the cheaper and easier way is to get it off of Amazon, and that way you have it in a digital form.
Yeah. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you, on Facebook, is it?
Yeah, the UFO Guys on Facebook. Just put that in the search bar.
If they want to email you.
My email is BMOSS. Right. Yeah, BMOSS and the number 6 at Verizon.net. So BMOSS, the number 6 at Verizon.net.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, thank you to all the good questions in the chat room. Really good from Becca and Simon and Janice, everybody in the chat room. There's loads of people in the chat room today. Diane and all the regulars. It's so nice to hear them all. and some good questions from Becca and Steph. They always like to send us some questions. It's been fun. I've enjoyed it tonight.
Appreciate it.
My guest next Wednesday will be Amanda Tuck. Next Wednesday, she's a psychic medium from the UK and a very, very good one. She'll be at UK time next Wednesday because we put our clocks forward this week. So we'll catch up with everybody else. But I've been doing these shows from 8 o'clock, but I've decided now to go to 7 o'clock. I think it's a better time. It is like 2 o'clock Eastern and 11 o'clock Pacific time. Well, thank you, Ben, for coming on the show. It's been good. I've
Thanks.
enjoyed it.
Peace. Appreciate it.
And I'll chat with you again in the future.
Yep. Thanks, Bob. Thanks for all the great
Thank
questions
you.
for everybody.
And everybody's saying great guests as usual.
Thanks.
And everybody's enjoyed it as usual. And you take care and have a lovely weekend.
You do the same,
Rebecca
sir.
just said thanks, Ben and Bob. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.
You take care.
All righty.
And we'll talk soon. When the show.
Definitely. Thank you, sir.